Welcome everyone to the Teach Access Student Academy. I am Rolando Mendez. I am Director of Education, Teach Access. Just to remind you that we're committed to making this event accessible. So turn on your captions using the CC button in your Zoom toolbar, usually located at the bottom of your screen. There's American Sign Language interpretation available. We keep it highlighted, so it's always there for you to see, and it also appears in the recording. Please let us know if you need any help by sending us a message to hosts and panelists in the chat. We're Teach Access, and we help educators teach accessibility and disability inclusions by supporting educators and students to acquire accessibility skills. We do this partnering with industry to share real-world practices, and our goal is that everyone has fundamental knowledge about accessibility regardless of their disciplines. And a good reminder is that all of our programs, our resources are free for students and educators. There are many ways to engage during this session and the other sessions of the Teach Access Student Academy. You can participate in the chat. We close it during the presentation, but you can always message us, hosts and panelists. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature from Zoom. You can take notes or don't take notes at all. Quiet listening also counts too. And do what you need. Step away, stretch, or take breaks as you need. Thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, ADP, Meta, and Skyscanner for making this event possible and keeping it free for everyone. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our 2024 fellow, Carly Lisowski, who has the pleasure of introducing our speaker for tonight.
Hi, thank you everyone. This is such an honor to introduce Ashley Shew. Ashley Shew is a professor of science, technology, and society at Virginia Tech. Her current research sits at the intersection of technology studies, biotech ethics, and disability studies. She is currently a principal investigator of an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation-funded higher learning project that supports the creation of a regional disability community technology center, or DiscoTech, providing guidance for developing disabled-led technology and disability-forward technological futures through humanities-based scholarship and disability justice, education, arts, and outreach. She's also involved in 2 current projects about structural ableism and disaster building planning. Shew's 2023 book, Against Techno-Ableism, Rethinking Who Needs Improvement, and forthcoming open textbook, co-edited with Hannah Herdigan, Technology and Disability, both focus on the stories disabled people tell about technologies. She's also the sole author of Technological Knowledge and Animal Constructions and co-editor of 3 philosophy technology volumes, Spaces for the Future, Feedback Loops, and Reimagining Philosophy and Technology. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Ashley for today's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share some of my research today. I'm screen sharing. You should see my slides now if everything has gone well. I do never quite trust the technology as a philosopher of technology. And then my slides will be shared as Google Slides in the chat at some point, so that you can have them and enjoy them and treasure them always. So thank you so much for your introduction. I'm really excited to be running under a title that is too much, which might suggest who I am as well. The slides I'll be using are black with white or gray writing on them. And on my front slide, I have my book, which is Against Techno-Ableism. It has my name, Ashley Shew. And it's like brightly colored with lots of little pieces of disability equipment, pills and lift-equipped vans and glasses and prosthetic legs and things like that. And my prosthetic leg is actually the one that's my leg is down on the bottom and the middle, and I glue googly eyes onto it. You can't zoom in that far today. So the foot has eyes. It stares back, everybody. Oh yeah, we get it. It's a fun joke that I get to say a lot. More during sandal season than during other seasons, I'm afraid. Anyway, so my title is Disabled Expertise Forever, disabled expertise for the future, or stop using checklists to avoid talking to disabled people. This is not material from my book, but it's part of this larger project that I have around like opposing technoableism in the things that we build and in the ways that we think about technology. Technoableism is a phenomenon that I like. It's not as if I created the phenomenon. I created a word to describe this thing that I was finding in lots of different disability literature, where disabled people who are writing about technologies are encountering messaging about technologies they need that they might not actually need, or that they never asked for. It's someone else's idea of what they need. So it's a phenomenon where helpers and medical professionals and engineers are supposed to use their expertise to help disabled people. But ableism is re-emphasized through what they imagine the problems of disabled people are and the things that they make to solve those problems. This is also often read to the idea that disabled people need intervention to be good enough, to need intervention, need technologies to be includable in the terminology of Tanya Tichkowski, need to be empowered. Like there's this huge impetus with the technology rhetoric that technology is going to be the solution that empowers disabled people in some way, with the presumption that disabled people can't be empowered and powerful until they are fixed, normalized, made into an image driven by medical professionals and engineers and therapists, and not necessarily disabled people themselves. You can see where this starts to get iffy. And here, I want to immediately give us poetry because I'm a humanities scholar. I really like this poem called Crypt Fairy Godmother by Leah Lakshmi Piepzanasamarasinha. This is from her book Tonguebreaker, which does refer to her last name in particular ways. Hey, there it is. And it's talking about sort of the brilliance of disabled people. Like Crypt Fairy Godmother is, oh, you are becoming disabled. Some people in the disability community are reclaiming the word crip, that you're becoming disabled. And here's what you need to know. But also, we're going to be learning from you as you become brilliantly disabled. Right? Parts of it speak about, how you're going to lose a lot of friends when you become disabled, right? How people are going to feel like your sickness is an affront to them. And sort of the what happens socially around disability. But I really like this particular phrase from it, this set of lines. You are not an individual health defect. You are a systemic war battalion. You come from somewhere. You are a we. We know shit they'll need to know. We know shit they have no idea of. We have survived a million things they said would kill us. We proved them all wrong. Even death is different here. And this is really about claiming disabled people as knowledgeable, right? We know shit they'll need to know, right? Welcome. We know something about the future. We have knowledge that non-disabled people don't know and can't claim. So when I'm thinking about what it means to use checklists, to approach disability issues and to think that we can solve disability problems through, if we just have the right checklist, we can work through this and then everything will mean that disabled people are included properly. Checklists actually shift sort of where the locus of expertise exists. If disabled people are the ones who have shit you need to know, and shit people have no idea of, it might not be things you can put easily on a checklist. And so here's where the sort of talk rests. I put the talk, not that one. The talk being a euphemism for some other things as well. Here's the thing. Disabled people know a lot of stuff. Disabled people haven't been listened to traditionally. For a long sort of history, people get to be the experts about disabled people rather than disabled people being seen as the experts of themselves. And if you are doing accessibility work, if you want to teach access and build things accessibly as a series of checklists, which checklists are fine, they're just not everything, you actually end up perpetuating the not listening that accessibility professionals and non-disabled professionals have done. And even disabled professionals can be guilty of as well, right? Just because you have one doesn't mean you have them all. right? If I'm going to do good work in a disability space, I have to be listening to a lot of other people with disabilities to do good work. And we can do this work differently. And I'm going to put this talk in relationship to current conversations about AI tools at some point, but I'll get there. I'm going to take it in a series of steps to get us there. And where my sort of research sits is in this place where a number of disability studies scholars, and there's like a screenshot of an academic paper that says, "I'm just terrified for my future. Epistemic violence and disability-related technology research." And it's written by disabled technologists in human-computer interaction, where they're disbelieved at work, even when they have expertise about the disability type they might be working on. Their knowledge and advice is discounted, even though they have the credentials we would normally talk about as being important in this field. So this concept of epistemic justice or injustice comes from Miranda Fricker out of philosophy, and it refers to epistemology, the study of knowledge. And epistemic justice is if you're being you're being given your due justice as a knower. You're being valued as a knower about your own testimony, your own conditions. And for so much in the history of disability, and for so much in sort of ableist cultures in work and at school, we often aren't really listening to disabled people. And there's a longer history of this. Here I'm showing some classic images from the history of eugenics, like one does during a talk in 2026. But this is the Tree of Eugenics from 1921 that was used as part of the Second Congress on Eugenics that has all of these different fields that you can't quite see all the words. Genetics and anthropology and statistics are these sort of roots of this larger tree of eugenics. And then there's these sort of steps. This is from a textbook, levels of mental development and deficiency. So sort of charting mental age and what different people at these steps are capable of. This ends up pipelining people with intellectual disabilities into particular jobs, or keeping them out of the workforce altogether based on IQ. So the context where we are sorting people by disability is actually really ugly and harmful to lots of disabled people, deadly to others, in really significant ways. And we still use lots of categories around disability, especially in accessibility work. And I think these are important. I think we can also get really caught up in categorizing in a way that doesn't necessarily improve the things we make for people. So most categorization and description of disabled people is done by non-disabled experts about disability. And this follows that most checklists and research about disabled people is also done in ways that select for a very narrow set of criteria. A lot of technological research is seeking out disabled people of particular types. So, we want, people who have autism level 1 for this sort of university study that we're doing, or we want below the knee amputees with more than 1 inch of tibia to try out these new prosthetic feet that we want to design, right? We often see disabled people as test pilots for different technologies. Tech projects around disability are often lauded and funded. There's a lot going on in this space, but most disabled people are multiply disabled. And most of this research is about a very narrow set, even within like a group of amputees, a very narrow set of amputees or a very narrow set of people with autism. And that means that this research doesn't map onto real human experiences. Most disabilities are variable or dynamic. So you can have different experiences, different days. You might have a flare-up of different symptoms. It doesn't look the same every day in ways that are really hard to account for in some of this. And most tech research about disability is also really silly because the categories are so narrow and typified. And the idea of disability is really static. So checklists are good, but it lets us turn away from disabled expertise, from doing this sort of thing that would give disabled people like justice in this system. And it lets us look away from sort of how complicated disability actually is, in terms of type and experience. And there are just so many ways to be disabled and so many experiences of disability that when we work through things in this way, we try to tidy things up in ways that actually get us away from listening to disabled people and all the complication that might cause. So in my research, I'm asking how we can actively value disability and how we can actively value disabled people. Because even within tech research, where we want to do good accessibility work, we see sort of a mismatch between people's experiences, their embodied experiences, and sort of where the tech sector is meeting them. So how do we get out of this sort of dominant approach to disability that often sees disabled people as test pilots or as human subjects to be researched upon, rather than is engaged in this process? So how do we rehabilitate this? And checklists become really insulting when it's also used as a means of avoiding interactions with users and the communities of users in really rich ways. Sometimes it is. So we're in a position where disabled contributors and creativity and value are often bulldozed, flattened by how we think about how to even start in a research project around disability. And if we want to think beyond sort of tolerance, so there are certain approaches that are like, well, we can tolerate disability in this way, or we can accommodate. Oh, so we'll have some sort of different path for disabled people to take that will be, friendlier website or a friendlier technology once you click through a particular menu. Or we ask disabled people to be sort of assimilated, right? We've have this thing. You're going to use it in the way that we want, or you're not part of our user base. So to think beyond these modes, we can actually come to see disability as like, and this is something Rosemary Garland Thompson talks about, an epistemic and narrative resource for understanding and improving the world. When you see this messiness of disability and encounter sort of the fact that there are so many ways to be disabled, this is actually a place that can be really generative, rather than to think about it as something where we need people to be normalized, or to create technologies where people, have to go through in a particular like route in order to be, properly included. Disabled people have unique ways of thinking, being, and perceiving. Some people in the deaf community, talk about deaf gain as opposed to hearing loss. And there's a whole neurodiversity movement that sort of talks about some of the strengths that some of these different conditions involve, rather than seeing it as something that needs to be repaired or changed or addressed outside of like what the community actually would like to see. And this involves sometimes challenging compulsory able-bodiedness. I always say to myself, do it disabled. Yeah, you're going to look awkward doing it. This is something I repeat to myself often when I'm having a day where more internalized ableism is oozing out. Like, why do I need to do it in a normative fashion? Right? If I'm going to flub all over my words because I can't remember things properly, because I have some cognitive disabilities, well, I'm, just bulldoze through it. People are going to see that I'm disabled, and that's not the end of the world. That also means viewing others through the lens of sometimes things are not as expected. And some of those expectations are silly, right? Why do I need eye contact in a particular way? What does it say about me and my eye, like that I can't meet people's eyes in a particular way? And it shouldn't say anything, but we end up making judgments based on appearance in ways that don't let people like have their full due. And we can have exchange and community and strengthen knowledge. Here, I think about cross-disability understanding as a way to approach all disability topics. I like this quote from Mission Astro Access, which is this group of disabled people who are talking about including disabled people in astronaut and flight programs. And I've highlighted the bit that I'm most interested in. When criteria are rethought to include a wider range of people and capabilities, these systems can be made safer overall. When we design environments, systems, and technologies for the broadest possible set of users, we not only expand inclusion, but yield significant benefits for mainstream users. So it's not just good for disabled people. In fact, that we listen to sort of the multiplicity of disabled people in cross-disability conversation, we actually build better systems. We build safer systems that consider, evacuation of more bodies or how to access things multimodally. Sherry Wells Jensen, who is part of Astro Access and one of the co-founders, has written the case for blind astronauts and actually gives the example of the Mir space station. When they had a fire on board, all of the crew got disoriented and they were trying to find the fire extinguisher, and it took them extra time because losing sight on things actually made it harder for them to navigate. And Sherry Wells Jensen actually argues that if you had blind crew members, you would have multiple ways of orienting yourself rather than just visually, and you could put out a fire or something like that much more quickly with a blind crew member. So actually seeing the disability not as a liability, but a strength in terms of how we plan our programs, how we build our shuttles, how we think about the spaces we design. This is true for digital objects as well. And so we often frame disabled bodies as risky, right? I see this, I read a lot of disability narrative, and so many times wheelchair users are told that they are like a problem for the fire marshal, and they the sort of classically oh, we can't allow you into this school because you're a fire hazard. When it comes to evacuation, there's often a framing that disabled people cause the rest of the group to be at risk in some way. But this framing that often justifies sort of second-class treatment and corrals our bodies in a particular way doesn't actually hold true very well. Usually it's a thin veneer for discrimination. And we can have a longer term for disability that is more robust than thinking about retrofit, which is often what happens. I think about the future being disabled, whether through climate change and natural disasters that will occur, and higher levels of disability, different pollution causing higher levels of asthma, for instance, new diseases like COVID-19, emerging and causing new patterns of disability. And even if we get it off this planet, Mission Astro Access might suggest that all people should be allowed to do, everyone experiences disability in space, which is not our environmental niche. So no matter whether you have the happy science fiction future or the dystopic one, both sets of futures will be more disabled and not less in the future, which is all the more reason to take advantage of disability as an epistemic resource. What does any of this have to do with AI? A lot, actually. So I think of the words of the poet, the cyborg Gillian Weisse, who says in one of her poems in a book called Cyborg Detective, "They are always inventing new hells for us." The thing is that proposals about generative AI, as people are imagining different uses for it, are really, really dangerous. And here I'm thinking about the way large language models are actually scraping from biased sets of data. So most, I can point us back to the pages from the 1920s and the eugenics movement. The data that's been scraped about disability reflects a lot of information from non-disabled people, often that paint our lives as tragic, that suggests we're dangerous and risky, that does all the sort of bad things, all the sort of tropes you might imagine around disability. And even it's scraping from, some of these programs are scraping from medical journals, which you would think would be a good thing to do. But we know that there are theories that exist in the literature, like the refrigerator mother theory of autism, that, if it scrapes that and spits it back out, the refrigerator mother theory of autism is that the way people become autistic is that their mothers specifically are called to them when they are infants, and that is how they get their autism. So it blames mothers. It's thoroughly debunked. This is not how autism occurs, but this is a major theory that people were talking about for a while. And even though it's debunked now, it still exists in this place and in spaces that will end up getting scraped by technology. So the data that's collected and scraped for large language models reflects all of the ableist biases you can expect. Some people want to think about AI as being more objective. It absolutely isn't. It ends up reifying existing biases in ways that are really harmful to disabled people. I think about research around AI chat agent therapists that put people at greater risk here too. I think there are a lot of people who will unfortunately be complicit in the deaths of other people because of this mode of research. Because if large language models have scraped all of this terrible data, and then someone wants to get therapy and talk about the conditions they have, they're going to be presented with some of the worst information, like worst in terms of like troubling and biased information, in ways that people will be put at greater like mental health risks in this case. I think about how AI will be deployed with the Social Security Administration in the United States and with Medicaid and other governmental benefits agencies that will disrupt benefits. Like this first places these things will be deployed is not in ways that will actually help people, even though I'm told, well, someday Gen AI will be used to help someone do something in the world of disability. The sort of things that people will end up investing in are not those things. It's already so hard to get disability benefits with people having to appeal multiple times to get coverage. We also already see the use of AI by insurance corporations like United Healthcare, who have cut people off from pre-approval, that have slowed down delayed surgeries and led to people's death, and often required a layer of extra paperwork for people's doctors and for them during their most desperate times. The sort of ways in which we might imagine AI are not the first ones that will be deployed. What I'm saying is that you're cyborgs, and cyborgs are technologized disabled people in the way that I think about cyborg, have reasons to be afraid of these AI solutions that sort of replicate, reify, and amplify all of this biased data, and biased data that's not created by disabled people themselves, but by this sort of larger system. We already see this in some reports. This is a report from the Center for Democracy and Technology, and I love this headline: algorithm-driven hiring tools, innovative recruitment, or expedited disability discrimination. With surveillance AI in education and hiring that is happening right now, we're seeing the deployment of eye and facial tracking that misreads a variety of disability types, having to do with like eye tracking and things like that. We know that if people are blind and using some of these programs, their eyes are not going to track in the way the computer system thinks. They will think someone is off camera helping them, or for people with different types of neurodivergent conditions as well. And these things will be used for threat assessment, like you'll be tagged as more threatening. I think about all the times I'm pulled out of line at the airport to be wanded down. It's every time for me. They swab me with a thing that checks for explosive material because I wear a prosthetic leg. Every single time. Like what it means to be disabled in this environment is to be scrutinized extra. And that can be not just an inconvenience as it is for me at the airport, but something that means that you're cut out of educational programs, that you're flagged as cheating, or that you're not hired by particular companies. And of course, we know AI detectors and plagiarism detectors don't accurately track things. And we see this greater scrutiny and automatic exclusion from video pre-interviews and things like that. Like these things are already happening. So what I want to say is sometimes big data is big scary. And here I have a picture of the cover of a book by Edwin Black, a historian. It's a really, really thick book. It's called IBM and the Holocaust, and it's about the way in which IBM was marketing and selling their punch card systems to better manage large numbers of people during the Holocaust. And some of these punch card systems were tracking things like who has had tuberculosis, who is in what ethnic category, what other disabilities might people have. We also know a lot of disabled people were murdered as part of the Holocaust, not just Jews, although larger numbers of Jewish people. And for me, we have so much more data than anything IBM would have dreamt up at that time, that it's actually much more scary to me to think about how this data can be weaponized against disabled people, and against people more broadly, but we see it as a clear parallel to what was happening in the 1930s and 40s. This means that disability tech work is really morally fraught, right? I'm so thrilled you're here at Teach Access. I want disabled people to have access to everything everyone else does. But I think the world of tech can also really rush very quickly into technology adoption and want us to try things out in ways that aren't always careful and critical, that don't consider sort of long-term and multiple impacts, that think about the best case scenarios and not the worst. And in fact, sort of the way in which humanities education has been on the downtrend, it makes me worried that we will see history repeating in various ways. But we're currently in a space where people are rushing. And often when we're talking about large corporations who are adopting some of these technologies, they're collecting information about users, about functionality, about transparency, about what tools end up being used against us. And even good technology promoted by well-meaning people can still subject disabled people to systems that do not operate in our interest. Is technology worth the cost, with an understanding that the cost is not just monetary? Technologies are never neutral tools, especially when the world is so primed towards disability-based bias in all of the data and testimony that exists about us. It means we're in a really awful position that can't be solved with a checklist. Including more people isn't great. If the inclusion can lead to terrible, like, oh, we'll include more data, it doesn't necessarily lead to good outcomes unless if it's protected in particular ways and guarded in others. So as Gen AI gets hyped and it's being imagined as a solution to all of these problems, and people are working on their Gen AI in more accessible formats, university and corporate research has been incentivized to include AI in more things. But this rush isn't great. I think the motto of move fast and break things that we see from Silicon Valley is a lot less fun when it's your body, your education, or safety, or ability to hold down to a job. When that's being broken, when your life and livelihood are at stake. And so it's really important to get feedback from lots of people with different disability types to actually do good by the disability community. Yes, that means everything will be harder. I think it's still worth doing. And it's worth doing if you want to do good in the world. Here I like what Hamre and Fritsch say. We have to agitate against independence and productivity as requirements for existence, right? A lot of times we think about technology as this will help someone be independent, but we should think more about systems that let everyone have a chance at life and of not being excluded in the first place. So I wanted us to think beyond checklists. I'm going to stop here if there are questions. I do have slides, and I'll share the slideshow, of course, in the links again, where I just talk about some of the consulting work that I've brought different groups of disabled people to do with a large team and the Mellon grant that we have. That's been super fun, and a different way to engage in technological research than some of these other ways that we've discussed. All right, I'm going to stop share, mainly so I can look at my screen better. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. We have a question here in the Q&A. As a disabled person interested in conducting research on HCI and disability studies, how can we avoid falling into the traps of techno-ableism and techno-solutionism? I considered a co-design approach, but now I'm thinking that I'd still just make an imposed solution or assumption that people want to be empowered through technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wish there were more disabled people in HCI. I think that's really important. I also think it's so easy to be co-opted into sort of techno-ableism because that's sort of the dominant mode of a lot of technologists. Oh, the question is when I was still looking at it. All right.
I'm sorry, it's over in the answered column.
Yeah, I just found it. We're good. So co-design as an approach, I think really does have problems. Like we think about it as a solution. Oh, yes, we should have disabled people designing along with us. But for most things that are done by co-design, at the end of the day, it's still an academic's name at the top of the paper, right? Who gets to share the results? Who gets to be in control of the product that you make? You can do this in a different mode. I like the mode of consulting. So consulting is something that different firms understand as a concept, And so what we do with disabled consulting is I just get together groups of disabled people, some that I know, some that I don't know. I make sure we have lots of different disability types represented because I think that's really important for us to learn from each other along in the process too. And and we go in and we hear about different research projects and people provide feedback. We have a problem with a leaky pipeline. There aren't as many disabled people who have good expertise that have degrees that we're like that reflect the amount of expertise they have about the built world and design, right? Disabled people are constantly like running into design problems, running into barriers as a matter of everyday living. And well, you need particular degrees to be, a university researcher or anything. There's a lot of really good feedback that we miss out on because of wanting sorts of credentials like this. So we have this consulting program where people are allowed to give feedback to different researchers. And we write it up I have a graduate student who writes up a report to capture all this feedback and the conversation disabled people have. The researchers are present and can hear the conversation. We don't do it anonymously. People can use pseudonyms if they want to and go under a different name, because that's also important, like to preserve, if people don't want to be recognized. But I think it's important for people to be able to find themselves in the literature. One thing that I find so inflammatory about how we do things in tech and med research is that, Dr. Down didn't have Down syndrome. My amputation is called a Borgreave Van Ness rotationplasty. Borgreave and Van Ness didn't have rotationplasties. Like, my body was subject to this thing and it doesn't get my name. Like, that seems really silly. And I even think about this with some of the different like medical devices that are named after people, but those people don't have the medical devices. Like, I really want disabled people visible in technology research. And I worry that code design covers over. And the way we can make that visible is by being named, even if it's not our own name, we can find ourselves later, right? My name, the pseudonym I used was thanked in this paper. You can search yourself on the web and still not, necessarily be found out in the same way. And also, like, if we're using our names, it presumes that you have expertise in important ways. And it's less dismissive. Like, I understand why human subjects protections exist. I also don't think it makes sense in the context of a lot of tech research. I get it in science research where you need to test out a drug and you don't want to reveal everyone's name who had the condition. But if we're saying, well, this is a cross-disabled group, I'm not even identifying what disability type you have. I feel like it's a different ball game entirely.
Yeah, exactly. Another question here, sort of in the same direction. I am a UXR specialized in doing accessibility research. I often struggle to convince teams to hold space for accessibility and including people with disabilities in UX research we run. I really found your points on the value of research with people with disabilities for creating better tools and experiences. Curious what advice you'd have for including people with disabilities with UXR at HCI. So you kind of addressed this, but I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, so I think about user experience research. A lot of what it does is still in a focus group mode, which I think is better than a lot of things that are done, or clicking through and watching individual users. I think we have a lot more fun in consultant mode, where we can what's fun is we've had lots of repeat consultants. And one time we were being taken through something as if we were a focus group. Like, the researchers were trying to say, well, what do you think of this one little widget? And one of the consultants interrupts the researcher, this is great, and goes, hey, we are consultants and we're being paid well for our time, so you don't want to waste it. Can you tell us the higher level of what's going on with this project and what you want to do instead of asking us about this one screen? Because sometimes, especially in user design, a habit you want to see how you would click through and navigate. But what the team really wanted to know was this sort of higher level of what you were trying to do so they could give better feedback than you were even asking for about the project and what you were trying to do. That was an amazing day because during these sessions, I just have to be quiet and not express my opinion. And I could have cheered at that moment, because that is how it should be. We should be able to interrupt researchers and tell them, hey, you're not actually making the best use of our time by asking these questions. And I feel like a lot of the ways we're forced to structure things in the social sciences look more like that because I'm doing humanities-based research. It's great. My university doesn't think my research is research because it's not generalizable. and I don't want it to be, right?
Mm,
Because I want to take into account that there's lots of nuance and that what we'll get will actually be more complicated than anything you can reduce in that way.
yeah, fellow humanities researcher here, so I feel you on that. Um, we have time for one more question. What advice do you have for disabled students pursuing careers in technology? How do we get people to take us seriously?
Oh gosh. I'm disabled and I'm from the humanities. How do I get researchers to take me seriously sometimes? I think there's a couple different strategies you might have. One is but I read the first question, what advice do you have? Give them hell is the first one. But the second one, like in a more serious tone, um, yeah, I think it's actually really hard to break into some of these spaces. I find that working with teams that actually are interested in some of this feedback has built up a lot of my credentials that other people in the sciences and technology world take me more seriously because I've worked with this other technologist they know, with this other researcher. Now it's hard to break into that. It's a relational process. And I'm grateful for colleagues who have taken me seriously so that other people take me seriously. It's very weird how that worked out. But once I had been on, an NSF grant with some colleagues, then it was like, oh, all right, her work's been funded by the National Science Foundation. I mean, forget that, like, there's an STS program, Science and Technology Studies program, in the SBE Directorate in NSF, and I recommend, looking for grants there, like getting your own grant, like gives you a credential that they understand. And a lot of our credentials they don't otherwise understand. They don't just say, oh, disabled, you must have a lot of expertise about the world, but they should.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's such great advice. Thanks so much. I don't know if you have a couple of words for this last question here. How do we bridge disability divides without assuming technology automatically empowers people? I know, a really quick question here for the
Oh
end.
yeah.
Yeah.
um, how do we do it? We do it well. I don't even that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes I think for me, reading stories about just like technologies that do empower people look very different than the ones people think will empower people. Like there's a whole bunch of like testimony and writing by some wheelchair users about wheelchairs as a liberatory device. And in everything I read from the design world about wheelchairs is that they confine you and that they're a problem and we need to recreate the wheelchair. There are a lot of good and tested technologies that don't get their due and that actually keep people from using them. I think about walkers as a cheap, simple, easy to use technology that would save us from a lot of additional medical problems, broken hips, etc. But you whip out a walker and everyone goes, "Oh, it's old people," and it has like such a taint of vulnerability that people won't use a device even when it's an excellent piece of equipment that more people should use. Like convincing people on the technologies that do empower people is sometimes a hard sell because of so many messages that we've been given by our society.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Powerful way to end this. We're coming up in the last couple minutes. I don't think we have time to dive into another question. Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with all of us. I really appreciated hearing from you. I know I learned a lot, and I'm hoping that the students here did as well. Thank
Well,
you,
thank you
everyone.
all so much. I appreciate it.